Thank you, everybody, for coming back. It's really made, I think, one of the biggest things that's kind of interest here is how much of a de facto network that Ethernet is becoming for manufacturing. Because it was not that long ago, it was 2003, a little over 10 years ago, I guess. But I actually spoke with an engineer at an event, and I asked him at that time what he thought about Ethernet coming down onto the plant floor, and if he was doing anything with it, at least at the MES layer. And he looked at me, and with no uncertain look in his eye, he said, Ethernet will come onto the plant floor over my dead body. Now, I don't know if he's still alive or not, but he's probably not employed if he still has that attitude, because I think it's pretty clear what's happened here with what we're discussing. And that's the point of this panel, as Mike said, we've got several questions. I'm an editor, I always have questions, but the point of this is really for questions from the audience as well, and that's why the panel's been assembled. So we'll start off, part of the abstract for this session is talking about the industrial networks, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So let's just cut right to the chase and talk about the ugly. We all know with applications and implementations of automation technologies, nothing goes perfect in every instance. So looking at the ugliness, share some of the ugliness you've encountered in some of the installations you've been involved with, and what you would recommend on how to avoid those as well. And it's open to the panel, so whoever would like to go first.
I know one of the issues our guys have had in the past is some of the devices sitting on Profinet do not respond to a ping. So they've had IT folks come and put a device and bring the network down or overwrite that address. So you definitely need to make sure to avoid that ugliness is to have really good documentation.
We found. Same. Okay. We found similar things. The biggest part is just training our technicians how to start up an Ethernet system and control our programmers so they don't have common IP addresses, so they're not they're not interfering with each other. Those have been the biggest issues.
Can you explain, how do you handle the training? Is that as part of the project training, or is that done advanced throughout, or how is that handled?
It's done in advance, and we involved our IT group up front with it, so they could help us manage those things. And what I found is I'm very fortunate I have a young IT group, so they don't have a lot of embedded, you can't do that answer to us. So I've been very fortunate that they actually listen to us and perceive us as their base customer. So they work quite well with us and help train us how to use Ethernet and Profinet.
Okay.
What we found very similar to Dave and Sam, mainly on Dave, it's the training. What we found is Profinet very easy to configure with the proper training. So, we've kind of standardized across the board, so we have common training for all our people. I'll tell you the biggest thing that we run into, and it's more on the hardware end, is cabling. And once that's established, and obviously there's diagnostics that support that, but once it's established, it works. And that's one thing that all my guys enjoy about the Profinet architecture is its stability.
I might say that I would be one of those engineers that 5 years ago would have said, no way, I'm putting Ethernet in. I had no confidence in it 5 years ago. It's only been in the last few years that I've been able to put an installation in and have no issues and no noise problems, no installation issues whatsoever. We had always used Profibus as a very standard, reliable communications network, and it was hard to migrate initially to Profinet, just the comfort level with it. We had no problems with installing it. The diagnostic tools we're using allow us to see the I/O and ping the I/O and troubleshoot it very quickly. As far as cabling goes, we've been using a pre-manufactured no tools cable end that goes on the end of the cable, and that's made 100% success with installation, not cutting off the connector, putting on a new connector again. They just work every time. So if you use the right cable and the right connector, the installation goes in very, very quickly. And the tools that we're using for troubleshooting the network allow us to configure it very, very quickly.
You know, cabling came up in a couple of points here in discussion, and that's one of the things we've heard a lot about from readers, and we've seen a lot of papers written about this, about choosing the right type of cabling and connectors. You know, not going with, even though it's Ethernet, not going with commercial or office grade cable. Is that something that you've run into, or something you had to overcome or learn about, or was that more of an isolated instance that you've heard of or been aware of?
Well, we use the standard Profibus specification, Profinet specification cable, which is a smaller diameter cable. By using the specified cable, we've had no issues with that. The connector that we're using is actually a Weidmuller product that our installation people can put on. It's a very straightforward, no tools approach, just strip the wire off. And it's also keeps the shielding intact. So we've really had no issues with any of our Profinet installations.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So now one of that we saw in some of the presentations as well, since we've gone from the ugly and how to overcome those, we saw some examples about unexpected surprises or pleasant surprises, well, things that were not on the list of things that were expected to come from the installation of the network. Can you share some of those from your experiences in installation with that? I'm sure you had a list of benefits you were expecting, but any that weren't expected?
The diagnostics are terrific.
Yeah, I agree with Sam. I mean, when it was about 6 years ago when everything was CAN buses, the field bus, and obviously there was challenges with the CAN bus, but the price point changed, you know, about 6 years ago in the industrial market. So, you know, I was really trying to push industrial Ethernet, and because of all the advantages, and when the price point broke, then we just started using it, and it's been amazing. The diagnostics. It's just a lot quicker to bring up, so we reduce a lot of costs as far as labor and bringing systems up now.
Yeah, we see the same thing where we also see it in the field. You know, at KUKA we build the complete assembly line and run it off on our floor, and then we break it apart and put it into our customers' end, facility. And when we plug it back in, there's a confidence level that network is going right back up the way it was unplugged. And in past field IOs, I never got to see that as much. I always seemed to experience some electrician's idea of rewiring and rerouting a cable that kind of messed up our field bus. And unlike Profinet, we just haven't experienced that in the last 3 installations we've done so far.
And that saves a lot of money. Saves my high-priced engineers from troubleshooting, wiring on the floor. Let them get to the commission.
Yes, in the past with proprietary networks, you would have multiple networks, all of the same color. Blue hose comes to mind, and you would spend a lot of time troubleshooting which blue hose network wasn't running. Installers would get the networks backwards, and it could take forever to get a serial network going. Even with Profibus, you were limited to the number of nodes that you could reliably put on for a high-speed network. So you would have multiple buses. With Profinet, it's just all one network. If you put a switch in there, you plug in, and the whole network's available to you, and you've still got the speed. So it is very, very quick to install. And with an Ethernet diagnostic tool, you can check your cabling, and then the system just up and runs. It's very, very fast to get going. As I said in my presentation, our whole network was running in 30 minutes. From the time that we were ready to commission it to the time every node was up and operational was 30 minutes.
Did you, speaking of that was one thing that surprised me too on that, was how quick that, did you have a different set of expectations on how long it was going to take, or were you expecting it to be roughly that quick, or?
We had 12 hours. On that particular job, we had 12 hours allotted to debug the network. So
wow.
we saved 11 and a half hours of installation time.
So that's huge. Yeah. You know, speaking of the one network, that gives a good segue into one of the topics that I was wondering about asking, and I saw it brought up in one of the presentations earlier, is about safety over Profinet and on Ethernet networks in general. Does anybody have any experience with that, looking into that? Because I know, just like the attitudes around Ethernet on the plant floor 10 years ago, you know, not going to happen, there's been a lot of that attitude that safety needs to remain on a separate work. So there's still two camps around that. Can you speak to that if you're looking into it, where you're at on that?
We've, I'm sorry. Go ahead. In the past 3 systems now, before actually that we built, we've actually used the ProfiSafe network, and all of our safety devices at the station level as well as the conveyance are all tied together, and it's been quite, well, we've seen quite a large savings in our material cost. It's also given us the flexibility to change our safety directives as our risk assessments tell us we have to, or as we add additional equipment. It's been very flexible for us also, which saves us, you know, typically when we do retrofits or add-ons to stations as well as conveyance.
Now, were those, just quick before we move on from that, were those added at customer request, or is that being added now as standard in how you're making those systems? Or
They're designed, well, our designs they're built into our initial design to use safe, ProfiSafe, but as we run the line or ramp up production, there's typically customer-driven changes or reloading of equipment to different stations, and that reloading sometimes can cause a change in your safety circuit.
okay.
Yeah, it's impractical to put in separate networks for a safety system, particularly on a retrofit. Safety equipment is very dynamic in that as the operator, or if the customer has a safety issue due to an incident, they may wish to add to that system. If we've got one network installed, it's very easy to add another safety device to it. Whereas if you have a dedicated network, well, you've got to pull the network to that location. So it's been very easy to expand the network. I don't see any reason why you would want to have a dedicated safety network. The Profinet is been tested as safe. It meets all the requirements, so I don't see a reason to put a separate network for the safety system.
I totally concur with the Daves, and we've embraced the safety networks, ProfiSafe, primarily on a lot of our products. It gives us the flexibility for changes, and that happens on with redistributing assignments on the plant floor, or just situations that arise. The other thing that we've been utilizing the ProfiSafe on is our AGV, AGC products. With the mobile HMI, I'm pretty excited that everything's safe, meaning I could be hauling around 100,000 pounds on an AGV, moving very expensive plane parts around the plant, and the scanners, the bumpers, everything on board that AGV is safe, and the individual that has that mobile pendant in their hand, I mean, that's SIL 3 safety rated, and it's just a real exciting product, and I think it's just going to grow across the board because it reduces so many components, and that's where the cost is driven now, and you try to take the labor out. I mean, my whole thing is, how many components can I remove from the system? Unfortunately, everything still needs power, and that cabling is still a challenge. But we're real excited about the ProfiSafe environment.
Moving e-stops or adding e-stops or light curtains or whatever just makes it so much easier in the field, and that you're always gonna, when you're commissioning a system in the plant, you're always gonna have slight modifications, which is a lot better than running hard wires everywhere.
Right. Was that?
I was going to say just one last point. As an integrator, we're responsible for the safety system. So if there's ever an incident that requires investigation, we're invariably involved in it, and we have the design responsibility. So we've got to have something we can stand behind. if we were ever investigated.
And working with clients or internally, in your cases, when it comes to that, how did you overcome that? Because there has been that long bias towards the separate, system for safety. How did you overcome it internally, or how do you overcome it working with customers? Is that a hurdle anymore, or how would y'all characterize that?
Well, there's enough documentation. The equipment has been tested to international standards. So I think we can stand behind that as an appropriate system, not of our own design, but of fully tested, certified equipment.
There's still some dinosaurs out there, like the guy you met 10 years ago, that need to be
It's
educated.
still around. Yeah. All right. Oh, can we get the microphone over here? Yes. And that is, while we're doing that, this isn't the Dave show with questions. So please, any questions you have from the audience, raise your hand, and we will get a mic over to you. Oh, no, that's great. Yeah, no, thank you. Here we go.
So in other Ethernet networks, it's always been some concern about separating HMI from I/O communication, things like that, to prevent problems with like network trafficking and network storms. Is there something about Profinet that actually prevents that? So we're not worried about, something, a broadcast storm, network traffic, that kind of thing.
Well, Profinet has a channel for I/O that bypasses the TCP/IP stack, so it's very quick and it addresses the I/O. But you can still run the HMI on top of it through the TCP/IP normal connection. We have had no bandwidth issues related to that. I can't testify to the actual technical details of it, but we've been able to get the throughput, and our installations are all running at gigabit throughput.
Because I would think that would be the concern with putting the safety on the same network, is what if is there traffic issues that would cause a problem?
Dedicated safety channel for Profinet. Dedicated safety channel, and if that went down, the safety system's going to trip you offline and make it safe.
Yeah, that rides on a separate layer, and we use the I device for our real-time I/O also, and it's very, very responsive, and we've been real satisfied with the predictability of it.
And it's still a good idea to isolate networks where it makes sense. You don't want one huge network for your whole plant.
Oh, I might say on a per machine basis, a single network is okay. Sure. We would always separate drive networks and HMI networks and things in the past. We found on a 50-point node, we can keep one network and 5 or 6 HMIs and a SCADA system all operational without any problems. But you're right. If you're talking a 100,000 square foot plant, you may want separate networks.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we do the same thing on assembly lines. We break it down into sections or zones for segments. Thank you, Mike. And going back to the safety thing, is working with different end users and different customers that I have. Every one of them and I have sit down and put audit documentation and tests together to make sure that we still meet all their safety requirements as well as our own corporate ones.
Any other questions?
I was just going to comment on your question about rolling it into the facilities. We went through a rigorous communication plan with the UAW because you're putting safety into taking it off from hardware. Electricians were worried about it, so we went and met with the national UAW guys, got them on board with it, cascaded it back down to the plants, and it's been a huge enabler for the acceptance of it in our facility. So you got to communicate it, and you got to get people to believe in it, and when you get that, you can deploy it with no risk.
Thank you. Any other questions before we move on? Oh, one over here. Yeah.
Raul Rodriguez with ExxonMobil Research and Engineering. So yesterday's panel talked about 61508, 61511, and the recommendations to segregate the safety networks or the safety devices from the rest of the network. And First of all, I would recommend to the ARC to perhaps do a future session on these two different camps, as you mentioned just moments ago. But does the panel feel that their recommendations are in line with these directives?
I haven't had any issues or any customer feedback that says they're not. And as I said, I'm kind of responsible for the safety system if I design it. So they have to take a lot of confidence in me, and I've not seen any ramifications of it. There's still a lot of equipment out there running off one single channel e-stop buttons with a control relay, no prevention against welded contacts and things like that. So I think the Profinet solution is much safer than what I'm quite often seeing, which is the single e-stop, single channel with just a regular control relay. So, I think anything we've done is an improvement.
Any comments on that? Okay. You know, Dave, before we move on, just to come back, David, you mentioned using Gigabit Ethernet speeds on that, and that's something that's been much discussed about. Originally, it was discussed about maybe for high-speed motion control applications, but I'm seeing more examples here and there that are referencing use of it more ubiquitously. What's your experience with that? Is that becoming more standard now, or still 10-100 fine? I'd be interested to hear where the panel stands on that.
Well, in our installations, it just auto-configures and sets at 1 gigabit. We don't have to tell it we want 1 gig. It just runs at 1 gigabit. And again, that was a surprise to us. We've never had a reason to try to set it to a lower baud rate.
Any other experiences with that or preferences around that? Or?
Well, it was the last piece of our networks that we had to upgrade was in our Unicode drive systems for our test stands. And recently, we've just finished compliance and making sure that the Profinet will work for that. And we have all of our new test stands are coming out with that now.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Now here's a big one. We've heard it discussed in a lot of presentations, not just this week, but over the past few years. What about interactions with IT when it comes into this, where we saw it referenced even in some of the slides here today? Everyone's got their own experience with it. It still seems to be that ongoing issue, maybe less so more today than it was just a few years ago. But how are you handling that now that the networks are ever more so interconnected, and even with the Internet of Things? What's your experience in working with IT, getting the two groups to work together better when it comes to this, their knowledge of the industrial networks?
The 40-year war has to end. So.
But hasn't yet, or?
It hasn't. It's
Yeah.
getting better, but it does have to end soon. You always have IT and operations fighting against each other, and turf wars and facilities and all that, and they have to work together. And it's like when you asked about the ugly. The ugly was the IT guy comes in, he pings the network. There's some devices that don't respond to a ping, so he thinks that address is fine, and it's not. So there needs to be a collaborative effort, and like I said, the war has to end.
Yeah, I think it's communication. I mean, we require real-time systems, and that really doesn't work in the IT world. And there's a line there that has to be respected and communicated. And it's an ongoing challenge. But we're getting through it. I'm real excited about the future.
Yeah. Stuxnet kind of killed it for everybody as far as connecting level 1 control systems into the plant network. My experience has been that IT puts a roadblock up. Your network is separate from my network. They don't want anything to do with it. And I'm actually finding it's going backwards as far as, say, remote access into a control network. There being more clamps put on that these days, particularly with Windows XP going away and Windows 7 being the new platform. The IT people are really tightening down on remote access. Some of my clients have recently had machines shut down because of remote access. So the IT group is tightening up that availability. And they really want to put a very strong wall between level 1 and the IT.
Of course, the thing that Stuxnet proves to us is that the fortress model of network security, of like just not allowing anybody to have access to the network, doesn't work.
Next was the USB. Yeah, that's what did it. Yeah. Any other comments?
Yeah, I see the same thing, a lot of the same things that everybody's talking about. It's, I get a different set of regulations or rules out of every customer I have. Here's where the line of demarcation is for our relationship with Ford is much different than it is for any of our other customers. It's just trying to find the right ground rules so we can get the information they need and they can give us the information we need. And it's a battle, but it's something we have to go through.
Now, David, you mentioned it about tightening up access for remote monitoring and controls of that. We're seeing more and more examples and instances that the HMI is going ever more mobile for the tablets. So where does that stand? I mean, with how are you managing that with the IT tightening that and I guess more demand or more interest in doing that remote sort of operations remotely?
Need to put a firewall in there and well thought. I mean, Phoenix has the MGuard product that we've used in the past, very nice product, but you definitely just can't leave it open to the world. So.
Mm-hmm.